So hello everyone and welcome to Black All Year. I'm Stephanie Doucet and I am the creator of Black All Year, which is here to remind everyone that Black issues and challenges, our achievements and experiences happen all year round and not just in Black History Month, which happens to be this month in the UK. If you've missed any of our previous events, they are available on YouTube and as a podcast. And if you are watching or listening to this after the event, then please like and subscribe, because that'll make sure that you don't miss out on future material. And it also helps others to find the content as well. Now, it's quite funny because I often find that when I'm preparing for these Black All Year events, there's loads of examples of what we're going to be talking about that will present themselves to me. I think it's something called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon or something like that. And that's certainly been the case with today's subject of trauma and trauma-informed practice. I'm really delighted that our guest today is Marsha Hylton. Marsha is a trauma-informed consultant with a unique blend of specialist coaching skills, intensive experience in the health and extensive experience, rather, not intensive, although it may be both, in the healthcare and education industries, and a really deep personal understanding of trauma recovery. She says her mission is to guide organisations towards creating safe and supportive environments by harnessing trauma-informed principles. She has over 30 years in the healthcare and education industries as an advanced medical practitioner and lecturer. Marsha brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to her consultancy work, and her experience extends to promoting holistic health with a particular focus on women's mental and emotional well-being through community education initiatives. And not only that, but Marsha is a certified integrative and transformational coach, which blends her clinical knowledge and acumen with trauma-informed coaching techniques. And she empowers individuals and organizations with tools and strategies that are rooted in compassion and resilience. So welcome, Marsha.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Steph. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem at all. And Marsha, I mean, we had a little bit of an introduction to you there, but tell us about you and your background and how you've kind of got to this point that you're at now.
Okay, so my background, as I said, is nursing. So I was a nurse, and I also retrained as a physician associate. So I practiced medicine, and more recently within hepatology. So it was acute liver disease, end stage liver disease, but also alongside my professional work, from a personal perspective, I was also, and I'll be transparent, but I was a victim of domestic abuse and emotional abuse as well. So that's how I became involved, really. So over the years, I've worked with a lot of women in women's groups, looking at recovery from trauma, the trauma that's caused through those emotional aspects of the relationships that they were in. And that's really how I have come to be in the place that I am right now.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that it's to be able to survive that experience is one thing, but then to be able to use that to be able to heal yourself, but also then go on to help other people. Is that part of your healing process, do you think, helping others?
I believe that it is. It's always been something that I've done. I think just being able to listen to other women's stories, because it is predominantly women that I serve, and to be able to just assist them and to help them to have those aha moments about how they can, build resilience, to be able to move forward with their lives, because particularly around emotional trauma, narcissistic abuse, that kind of trauma keeps people stuck. If you've heard of the flight, fight and freeze, there's also other things, like fawning and flopping as well. And a lot of the times women find themselves in that fawning. So they've tried everything to recover or to escape. And when they get to that fawning place, it's where you just give up. You just allow things to happen. You become a people pleaser. you're doing everything to please other people just so that you're not upsetting the apple cart. And for me, my work is around helping women to move past that, to understand that they are worthy, to understand that they can heal and that it is possible to move past that. And because that had been my experience and I was able to do that, but of course we need help to do that. So, I mean, I did have therapy, I did educate myself around that, but sometimes it is hard to get to that place. And my job is to help women get to that place where they can start the journey to move on with their lives.
Yeah. And I mean, you've come from a clinical a medical background. I've worked in the NHS. Trauma is a really interesting word, isn't it? Because if you're in the kind of the health, the physical health side of health services, trauma is a very particular thing. We have major trauma centres. It's normally linked to some kind of physical injury.
Mm.
Tell us what you mean when you're talking about trauma.
Okay, so just as you say, people tend to think of trauma as this physical thing, this major horrific event that happens. But trauma is more than that. Trauma isn't necessarily about the event. In fact, it's not about the event that's happened. It's about our emotional responses to that event. When we have what I would term big T traumas, just like, the horrific event that everybody can see, you can understand why people would have traumas. But then there's what I call the little T traumas, where it's the everyday drip of everyday life. So it could be if someone's in, a toxic relationship, it's the drip of being undermined, feeling unworthy, or it could be somebody going through a divorce, or it could be financial difficulties that people are having. All of these cause the drip of trauma, so these little T traumas. But what happens over a period of time, they build up and will have just the same effect as the big T traumas. So you still have those, the effects of trauma in that way. And that can show up physically. So people will have, the physiological responses. So it'd be, the increased heart rate, joint and muscle pain, autoimmune breakdown, and then there's the emotional side of that. So, it might be that they're not sleeping very well at night, they may be withdrawn, so there's all of these things that come together that can indicate and, show that actually this person might be having, effects of some form of trauma. So it's understanding that.
And it's really interesting as you're talking now. You can tell me whether this is an example or not. And it's quite I suppose some people might think it's a bit of a flippant thing. And I was doing a talk yesterday and talked about hair, and hair's a big thing for me at the minute. So I have, and you'll be the same, for decades I've had random people who will just touch your hair.
Yeah.
And it's got to the point now that if my partner puts his hand in my hair, I have this really quite extreme physical and emotional reaction to that. So, last night we're sitting on the sofa and he knows as well. So he kind of went like that to my hair. And I just looked at him like that. And he went, "Oh, sorry, touched your hair." Is that one of those very small little things that just keeps tripping? Like I say, it's quite a kind of, frivolous thing, I suppose. But
well, you see, the thing is, they're not frivolous because, if you trace that back to when the first time that happened, when somebody is touching your hair, what is that signaling to you? So that was a trigger. So, when people have done those things in the past, your interpretation of that has been a negative one. And so you carry that with you. So even if somebody, like your partner's touching your head, that will be a trigger that kind of sends you back to that time. And it's done unconsciously. And until we kind of work on those things, we do get triggered. Things will trigger us. And I could give you an example as well. I had a client who had a toxic relationship, and she's doing really well, and she's getting on with her life. But what she said, she called me out of the blue recently, and she was crying, down the phone. And so when it came about that what had happened, she worked in an insurance company, and somebody had called her to complain and was really, really rude. But what happened was the tone of this man's voice, the slow talking, and just the rudeness and the insulting that he poured down the phone to her triggered her massively. It just took her down a rabbit hole. And she'd been out of that relationship now for, a good 5 years. But it was just that, and normally she was able to cope with things, but the trigger was the fact that his voice sounded very similar to her ex-partner's voice. So it's really, those are the things that can trigger.
Yeah. And I suppose, in the context of Black Hole Year, for people of color, for Black people, there is a very clear experience that we would have of racism. And I think, again, it's really interesting in the context of the way that you've described trauma, because a lot of people think of a racist attack, for want of a better word, as being something quite violent, lots of shouting, horrible words, all of that type of thing, and very noticeable. But for a lot of us, that's not what we have at all. It's something a lot more subtle. It's that experience of, and it is that, when you were saying that drip, 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 it's those little small incivilities, those small incidents that happen over and over again, that we think at the time, oh, they're too insignificant to flag.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a really, I think most, Black people can relate to that. And certainly from my experience, it can actually make you ill. And certainly I remember being in a particular workplace many years ago where this was actually happening to me. So I can draw on my own experience, and that this was happening to me on a daily basis, to the point where I actually started to doubt my own capability to do the job that I was employed to do. It was a job that I'd loved and had done for years. And, certain people just made it to the point that I don't know what to do anymore, to the point where I had to go off sick, and subsequently was kind of chased out of the job in a way then. But yes, it's this, and it's how we cope with this. There is nowhere for us to go sometimes. And that's the thing that needs to change. And certainly within organizations, there should be a way that we're able to address that. And I think that's where trauma-informed practice is something that is really what most organizations should be working towards. And it's that whole sort of intersectionality, isn't it, when you're in the work environment or working in a particular organization, because it's an added complex layer to everything that we're going through. So you've got to think about, you're thinking about, our race, the intersectionality of, gender as well, disability, our sexual orientation, all of these, mental health, all of these things come into play. And those are really important issues that really do need addressing.
Yeah. And actually, it was interesting that you brought that up, because I was wondering whether, so for you in that situation that you shared there, you were already dealing with the trauma from your relationship, but then you've got this treatment at work, and do they layer and kind of compound each other in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you've got things around, feeling worthy. There's a lot of shame attached to that as well. There's the whole thing around whether you're actually capable, because there are parallels. When you're in the work situation and that's happening, and then you're dealing with stuff at home within your personal relationship. The two do interlock. They do overlap. So you do feel, so it is compounded, and there's sometimes it feels like there's nowhere to go with all of that. So yeah. I would
Yeah.
say so. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned trauma-informed practice. What on earth is trauma-informed practice?
Right. Okay. So trauma-informed practice really is, it's been informed by neuroscience, by psychology, by the social sciences, and it includes what we call trauma attachment theory as well. So there's something called ACEs, adverse childhood um, experiences. So there's this whole sort of framework around that, and recognizing that when you have had an adverse childhood experience, that actually can follow you into adulthood and can affect the way that you show up in the world. So organizations now, to become trauma informed, it's about actually aligning your values, your organization's values with the principles of trauma informed practice. So there are quite a few, but there are six kind of predominant ones that we use. So you might be talking about safety. So you have safety, you have choice, you have trustworthiness, you have empowerment, you have collaboration, and also cultural considerations as well. So if we take each one, so if we're talking about safety from a trauma-informed perspective for organizations, then it's about looking at the person's life in all their context. So whether that's, family, the social, so looking at the physical, all of that, and keeping them safe. So it's making sure that, that they're safe, and that within the organization, we as staff, help people to help them to assist them to ask for what they need, that they know that they're safe, making sure that our policies and protocols, safeguarding, etc., all of those are done in such a way that we are maintaining, patient or client safety. Mm. And what we want to do along that is to prevent re-traumatization. We don't want to be re-traumatizing people. And one of the key things with trauma-informed practice is that when we, if I look at it in the context of healthcare, and say a person has come to the GP, for example, and we've all heard stories of, aggressive patients that come in through, to the reception and shouting at receptionists and all of that. Normally the response would be, what's wrong with that person? Trauma-informed practice looks at it, puts a different lens on it. So we're looking at what happened to that person to make them respond in that way, and what can we do to temper that for them and to help them through. So those are all about safety. And then there's about trustworthiness.
Can we just want to sit with safety just for a second? So I think it's really interesting. I've seen some stuff recently on social media from various things. And you know what, if you're anything like me, you'll see something and you go into the comments thinking, well, of course, everybody's going to think the same way as me. And I've been quite shocked by some of the comments in that. So examples of employers not recognizing that their employees have a life outside of work. Right. And that will impact on how they are in work.
Right.
And this kind of thing of, we're a business here. What the phrase that really triggered me was, we're a business, not a charity. And being a charity chief executive, you have to be really careful with your margins as a charity. It's not kind of a really cozy thing to be running. It's a lovely thing to be running, but it's not cozy. But this whole idea of, it's almost like you're a machine at work, and you don't have emotions, you don't have thoughts, and you don't have an outside life that might impact on how you are at work. And actually that idea, the way you describe safety there, is actually as employers and as organizations, we need to recognize that whole person, because that whole person and what goes on inside and outside of work impacts on how they are when they turn up to do their job.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, carry on.
No, I was, for me, I think that's such an important thing. And it just shows that, sometimes organizations can be, for me, there's a resistance there around change. There's a resistance there, and that's why it's important for leadership to be. It all starts from the top, and it's leadership that needs to be able to bring those changes in, so that we're not traumatizing our staff, because ultimately there's something around self-care as well. For our staff to be looked after, that whole well-being of staff, and that's something that needs to be brought into their policies and procedures and protocols as well. But it's how do we get organizations to buy into this whole thing around trauma-informed practice, and so for me, it's really about educating, to let organizations know that actually this is the way to go in terms of being more productive. I mean, it benefits organizations to take on, the mantle of being trauma informed, because it enhances their business at the end of the day. But I think it is about education. It is about, leaders, people in leadership, being able to buy into that and to have that commitment from them, to be able for that to filter down through their organizations. Yeah. But it does start with them.
I love that example you gave of the kind of doctor's receptionist, because I don't know if they still call it that, but they used to have the violent patient scheme. So if you were aggressive in a clinical environment, verbally aggressive, so let's say you swore, you could be put onto the violent patient register, and then you had to go and find a new GP, and there were certain GP practices that were employed to deal with the violent patients. And it's very much, whilst, don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning any kind of aggression against staff, because actually that in itself is trauma. But there is something about, as you say, taking that time to go, why is this person so angry? What is it that's fueling this? What is it that we can do to help support and diffuse that, rather than just labeling somebody as difficult? And that be that a customer, a patient, or a member of staff. Because we'll all know that people have been labeled as difficult, and actually thinking about it, was there some trauma going on there that we just weren't seeing?
Absolutely.
Supporting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important that we, to be more trauma informed rather than being more directive. The old traditional way of working, is becoming obsolete. When we talk about working in a more directive way, it's about, people, if we take the healthcare, for example, or within education or wherever, where the bosses are the authority, and the patient or the client doesn't know anything, so it's all about them. That has to change. And I think, to be fair, I think change is happening. I think more and more organizations are looking at how they can become more trauma informed. And I think one of the things as well is building trust. That's one of the other principles of trauma informed practice. It's about having, getting to be trustworthy, so that clients and patients, whoever's coming through your doors, can feel that, and it's about staff explaining what they're going to do and why they're doing it. Going back to that thing about directive care, for example, you're just doing things to people and they don't know why it's being done. It's having those conversations, explaining, getting patients or clients involved in their care as well, and I think, and also making sure that you do what you say you're going to do, make sure that you do what you say you're going to do, and that any expectations are met, but not to overpromise either, because I think that's another thing. If we overpromise and then can't deliver, the trust right there is broken. And I think the other one of the other principles is choice. Getting patients and clients involved in their care, getting them involved in their care is a shared thing. Listening to the needs of the people that you're working with. collaboration, whether that's informal or formal. It might be that you have, peer groups, people that, have experienced the same thing, having them together, because you can learn from each other. And one of the things that I do with my work, with my coaching, I do group coaching, and having other people who have shared similar experiences can be really good to kind of bounce off each other and aid healing. But I am, one of the things that I would be really cautious about is making sure in all of this that we're not re-traumatizing people, especially when they're, you don't want to be rehashing their stories all the time, because that's really unhelpful, because we know that especially trauma, emotional trauma, affects the neuroplasticity of the brain. So we have these neural pathways. So if you imagine the brain, the neural pathway, as maybe like a little dirt road. So it's very, very small, a small road. And imagine that you're driving along this road day in, day out. Traffic is coming down this road, and what happens? It gets wider and wider. And it's the same with the the neural pathways in terms of trauma. If we look at it from a trauma perspective, something happens and you have this dirt path, so you're going to respond and act in a particular way. Rehashing the story is just driving down that road again, and you rehashing the story, and that becomes wider. So you're affected by the trauma in a bigger way. And where is the healing in that? So we don't want to keep doing that, but we want to give people opportunities to be able to reframe their stories. That if they're going to be, talking about that, then it's about reframing and taking, the learnings from what happened to them, so that they're able to use those resources that they had to bring them to the place where they're at now. So if we're going to be looking at, their story, then making sure that it's done safely, and taking those inner resources that they had at the time of the event and bringing that into the here and now. So taking the there and then into the here and now, and use that as a starting point for healing, well-being.
And that, I think, and particularly in the context of race and ethnicity, is really important. I think that one of the things organizations tend to do is, when there is an allegation made of some kind of discrimination, is you have to keep telling your story, don't you? So tell us again, and what went, and really kind of drilling down and drilling down and drilling down. And as you say, it's that process is then just reinforcing what happened and the impact. It's the impact of what happened, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I certainly know there have been times when I have relived experiences that I've had, and it's almost as if it's been happening there and then.
Absolutely.
But the other thing that we do as organisations, particularly in Black History Month, is they get people like you and I on and want us to tell our stories, or they turn to colleagues in the organisation and say, tell us about all of your horrible experiences and how bad it is to be a Black person. And there is that element then of, actually, you are just reinforcing that trauma.
Absolutely.
Particularly if people feel pressurized to do that. So when I share my stories, I only share what I'm comfortable to share, first of all. And I'm doing it from, I think, what you were talking about. It's that more positive perspective of, actually, people can learn from it.
Yeah.
And I know how I've seen my resilience through that, and I've seen how I've grown and developed from that. So I'm doing it from quite a positive place.
Yeah.
But actually, that's not necessarily the position that people will be in. And I really recognize the kind of the power and the privilege that I have in being able to do that. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. We've got to be so careful when we are asking people to share experiences as to how we do that, and whether we even need them to do that.
Absolutely. I think that just reminds me of somebody had said to me, and I know that this is not unique to that person, when every time Black History Month comes round, It's, oh, can you do something for Black History Month, you know? And it's like, well, actually, no, I don't want to, you know. And so there's this kind of pressure, you know, that you must do something, you know, you're Black, therefore you set something up. Yeah.
And actually, it's that experience of othering, isn't it? It's the
Yes.
you are different, and this month is about you. And I'm sure it's exactly the same for Pride Month and you know, Disability
Absolutely.
Awareness Month. Of oh yeah, we remember how you're different. Well, we want you to do something for us about your difference.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is kind of at the root of Black All Year. It's that, well, you know what? You keep showing me that I'm different all year round, but you're only interested in that once a year. And
Absolutely.
then you put me back in the cupboard and forget about that difference. And then you bring me out in March because I'm a woman in March. I'm not a woman in October. I'm a woman in March, International Women's Day. You know, it's all that bizarre stuff. Um, yeah, so it is really kind of people. Uh, it's I think with the steps you're talking about, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, that's really simple, and it's not, is it? It's
No,
not simple to have that trauma informed approach.
yeah, yeah.
So we've had safety, we've had trust. There was
There was choice, and
choice.
I think we talked about, you know, giving, you know, service users a voice to be able to, you know, to be part of the care that they're receiving, and you know, being able to have their needs being listened to as well. And I think the other thing as well, one of the other principles is around collaboration. We talked about that, I think, so that can be formal or informal. Empowerment is another important one. You know, supporting.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you, but there's so much in this. Choice is an interesting one from an employment and thinking, you know, I was saying about these things that pop up on social media. The issue was around childcare and being able to work from home. And in effect, the choice to work from home had been taken away from this woman because the company had decided they weren't all of a sudden they weren't going to allow people to work from home anymore because they were putting the washing on. So what? And I think from an employee perspective as well, you know, some of us are really fortunate. We have a lot of choice about what we do, when we do it, to an extent, the hours that we work and things like that. But there are an awful lot of people who have very little choice at all. And it's you do this, you do it in this way, you do it in that place, you do it at these hours, and you have no control over the environment in which you work. So then for an organization to think about how do we bring choice and choice of things into that workplace, it could be quite challenging, I would imagine.
Absolutely. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about resistance. If you've done, you know, if it ain't broke, you know, why change it? So sometimes they will have that sort of mentality. And again, it really is about educating those that are in leadership roles, you know, and it is about actually changing their thought processes about how they work, how they see their employees, you know. And I guess it's getting past that whole directive way of working and working in a more collaborative way. And again, it's about putting those things into policies, you know, maybe a conversation with HR about how they can support their staff. And that's all part and parcel of staff well-being as well. So, you know, if they are committed to staff well-being, then that is something that they will need to consider. The world is changing since COVID 2020. You know, people are working in a completely different way to how it was prior. So, you know, we have to kind of move with the times as well. So, and I think if organizations are not prepared to take on the mantle of being trauma informed, then they, you know, ultimately in the long term, their business will suffer.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah, oh, definitely. If anybody's got any questions or comments that they'd like to make, then you know, either raise your hand or pop it in the chat box, and we can come to them. But so, Marsha, carry on. I interrupted you. What are the other thoughts?
And I guess the other principle is around empowerment and, again, it's that whole thing around choice. It's about supporting people to make those choices. That's the empowerment, helping them to do that. And then, again, I mean, we did touch on this earlier, around the cultural sort of considerations as well. And if we're, and I'm kind of thinking from, the health perspective, we need to be considering the stereotypes and the biases around that, even things like healing, looking at recognizing that, the value of traditional healing, bringing all of these things, so taking on what might be traditional to different cultures, different ethnicities, bringing that in, because they all have value. And I think sometimes we focus so much on the medical model, that this is how things has to be. When actually, for me, I think it's wonderful to see a blend of the two. I mean, obviously, we still have to kind of remain evidence-based, because we don't want to hurt people. But there are, but I think considering, those traditional values, respects the person, respects, their belief systems, their values, and that actually helps to create a better working relationship. It helps, So those are kind of like the six main principles that's got to be foundational. And when you're looking at your policies within an organization, or you're looking at your own organizational values, how does that align with those six principles, those major, the main ones? There are others, but those are the main ones. And making sure that your values, for your organizational values, align with that, then you're on your way to becoming, a trauma-informed organization.
Yeah. And just to go back to that, those kind of the cultural, what was the description, the word that you used, cultural?
Those cultural values, traditional
Values and considerations, yeah.
Yeah.
That whole, and it can be vast, can't it? From things around religion, culture, and practice, just down to some really small things and interactions that might mean that the way in which the one that's just come to mind is that actually I remember somebody was being interviewed for a role, and they were of Nigerian heritage, so I think left Nigeria as an adult, and had been in the UK for a long time. And some of the feedback was how formal this person was. They were very formal and quite cold, and they weren't sure that person was actually had the kind of skills that they were looking for, and the softer skills. I hate that term, because actually they're a lot more difficult, but those softer skills that they were looking for. But actually, they displayed all of the other skills that they were needed. So they did go back and have a conversation with them. And they said, we just felt you were quite cold and formal and businesslike in the interview. And the person responded, but that's how I thought that you needed to be in interviews.
Right.
Because that was the way that they'd been brought up in that West African culture. It is when you're in a work environment, and particularly in an interview environment, that's the way that you would behave.
Yeah.
And of course, nowadays, a lot of workplaces are a lot more relaxed and less hierarchical and things like that. Another example is around this deference to older people, or to people who are more senior, and actually that can lead to lots of problems in a workplace environment, can't it? So in some cultures, you would never dare challenge anybody who was of a higher in the hierarchy to you or older than you. You give them that deference.
Absolutely.
But it can, as I say, can cause huge problems that then become your problem, because you didn't challenge that person rather than that person who was doing the wrong thing. Yeah. And that ability to understand that some of that may have been at play there, rather than just being you didn't pull that person up when they were doing the wrong thing.
Absolutely. And that's so important. And And I guess the question then is how do we get around that? And I think it is about those things that we just talked about, looking at those stereotypical biases, looking at how, we can integrate properly in the workplace. So we're not having those stereotypical, you're breaking those biases, it's working towards that. And I think it's educating or helping people of color to be able to challenge. It's changing that trajectory, really, that it's okay to challenge. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly in places like HR, particularly being able to help people to be able to actually go and have a conversation with their superiors, their bosses, the person in senior management or in the senior role. And actually, I'd like to think that that can be resolved in that way. But it is, and I still think that still goes on. I believe that continues to go on. And I think it's about, again, being trauma informed. You're able to put policies in place that helps people to be able to come forward. Or it's about education. One of the things that I think is really important is about educating staff training, so people understand these things. It is about training. It's about putting policies, not just putting policies in place, but actually training. It's about helping people to understand what may be happening. So I think that's an important aspect that I wouldn't want to miss is training and education, and that needs to be top of the list as well.
Yeah. And as you say, I mean, if we just go back to that thing about challenging people in authority, there is that, okay, so actually you may have been taught and brought up that you don't do that, particularly if they're older than you. But also then if you are, for example, a person of colour and that person in authority is white, then there could be a whole load of other trauma around previous experiences of when that's happened that may stop you. And I suppose that's what you're saying, is that's the importance of having that trauma informed practice, is that you look at that person holistically as to why that may be difficult. And it's not just about that person, which I like, it's about the whole organization. So how does the organization need to change? What training do people in those positions of authority, for example, need to be able to encourage and make people feel safe and supported to challenge?
Right. So the whole thing around education and training, and I think it is about raising awareness about trauma, what that actually look like and how that will manifest. So it's raising that awareness. So having formal trauma training and education within your organization or your company, its effects, so people understand the effect of trauma, and it should focus on those principles that I just talked about. It's ensuring that leadership do have a commitment to organizational change, and that all should be evidenced in their policies and protocols, I think, and they need to be clear. I think there's also something around having safe environments as well. So having that safe space where people can go, that is welcoming and calm, all of those things that need to be in place, and having places where the people that you've just described can go if they're not ready to go to leadership, to talk about these things, having a safe space where they can go to talk about what the issues that they faced, and to work with, and to be able to have strategies, to be able to approach senior management, but be supported to do that, so they're not just going off on their own. But yeah, to having something in place that would support that. I think it's about communication as well, having the communication practices, having a look at that and what that might look like. And again, it's about training staff to be non-judgmental, training staff to have empathy. I mean, sometimes empathy is not something you can just train and have, but it's raising that awareness that, to be empathic, because I think most of us, do have that. But it's if we don't know, we can't necessarily show that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So it's around the training, and to be judgmental around that as well, I think is really important. It's about listening and validating that person's experience. We have to validate, not rubbish the experience that they've had. So I think that's really important. There might be that the organization might want to implement some trauma specific interventions. So it could be something around, some form of therapy, maybe some art therapy, possibly. And I'm thinking particularly within the health.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be something called EMDR. I think that's eye movement desensitizing reprogramming. I think that's what that's called. Or some other type of mindfulness is another one, just to help to damp down people's nervous systems as well. So I think those things are really important as well. And again, it's that whole I don't know, respect for boundaries as well is another one. So recognizing that these people may have experienced trauma, but also recognizing the boundaries around that as well. Yeah. So I think and to be culturally sensitive, that's the thing, within this, and they need to be tailoring their approaches really to accommodate that, and to just respect the diverse perspectives that are in their business, in their organizations.
Yeah. As you talk,
part to play with that as well.
Yeah, as you're talking, Marsha, I'm sitting and I'm recalling all of the moments throughout my career where there might have been some trauma there and I didn't pick up on it, and simple things like saying to somebody, "Oh, you should go and tell them," and not thinking about what might have made that so hard, and I'm sitting. I was about to start going, "Oh my God, I'm being so terrible," but actually, I had to bring my favorite Maya Angelou quote to mind, which was, "Do the best that you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better." And I think that's the thing for a lot of organizations. They don't know about this.
Yeah.
And because they don't know, they're not doing. And what I'm hoping through things like this and the work that you're doing is that organizations know, the impact of trauma and what it can do, and the fact that there is something called trauma-informed practice can actually start getting organizations and companies to learn about it and start changing their practice, start doing better, not beat themselves up because they didn't do it in the past, but really go, okay, so how do we capture that and do it now and support people now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's I mean, there's no time like the present is what I would say, and it really is about the training so that they understand about. I think that's first and foremost, training and putting the policies in place and actually knowing whether it's worked or not. So there's stuff around feedback and continuous improvement. So it's not you do it one time. It's actually doing it in a way that it's a continuous process. You're making adjustments as needed. So there will need to be the feedback from the people in your workplace. There's something around what I would say accountability as well, to make sure that the organizations are, and it doesn't have to be in a way where organizations feel like they're being, we don't want that. But it's a process that everybody can be involved in, and ultimately when that's in place, when you have those systems in place, it's a win-win. That's how I look at it. And also making sure that self-care and well-being is there's a big thing already, but making sure that that's still part and parcel of how an organization can become trauma informed as well. Supporting your staff, because it's, because it's new, there might be some resistance to all of that. So making sure that staff feel supported and not judged as well, because what we're doing, we're just moving away from maybe some traditional archaic ways of being. We're just upgrading. And so, and I guess it's how you bring it to your staff, and that everybody benefits as well. Because your staff members also might be, affected by trauma in some way. I don't think there's anybody really on the planet that hasn't experienced some form of trauma. So I think it's an important thing. Some of your staff members might actually be survivors themselves. So it's making sure that everybody feels safe, and that that staff can actually cope with the emotional demands of their jobs, particularly in the healthcare industry. And I'll speak from that. I remember an occasion where I had a consultant. He was Irish, really, really lovely man. And he had this kind of personality, and he was very woo, and it didn't always go down so well with all patients, And I remember doing a ward round with this particular consultant, and he was very good at his job. And he was, one of the patients was a young lady, and she just wasn't connecting with him at all. But he recognized that, because when we moved from her bed, he came up to me and he says, "Oh, Marcia," he said, "I'm really concerned about this. Pull up a chair and go and have a conversation with her." And because he was really concerned, find out what's going on for her. And for me, when I look back on that, that was trauma. He was using a trauma-informed way of being. That was a trauma-informed practice that he was doing. Go and sit with this person, be empathic, he was saying to me. He was saying that there's more to this than what she's saying. He's saying, I'm not the right person, but you might be able to help her. And, we had a long conversation. I drew up a chair, pulled the curtains around, and I was there for a while. And it turned out that this patient was on her own in the UK. She was from somewhere, I forget, Eastern Europe somewhere. And she was on her own. She had liver disease, and it was a scary time for her, but she couldn't relate to him and his personality. It's not about changing your personality, but it's about recognizing, your own scope of practice, where you can help this person if it means calling somebody else in to do it. That's all part and parcel of trauma-informed practice, so that your patient, your client, is getting the best care, and I'll always remember that. Being honest and reliable, and maintaining clear communication with staff members, with patients, clients. Again, you're building trust. So these are ways that organizations can start the process of becoming, trauma informed, and that at the heart of it is the patient, is the client, so making sure that their unique needs are being met. Just like in that example that I've just given, that young girl's unique needs were being met because I was able to pull up a chair, hear her story, and actually make sure that things are in place to support her. And sometimes that can be missed. I know from my own experience, when I was working in hepatology, it was almost like a revolving door. You get patients medically fit for discharge, and then you discharge them, and then they come back. So you have this, we've not recognized the trauma that's brought them back. So how do we fix that? How do we make our, ward trauma informed, so we're taking in the whole patient, not just getting them medically fit for discharge? So those are the things that we need to consider.
Yeah. And if we think about that in the context of employees as well, we know at the minute just how difficult it is to recruit. And how expensive it is. If you lose an experienced member of staff, it's going to be months until you get somebody in and up to their kind of level of performance. So actually, if we can make make sure that staff and colleagues feel seen and heard and understood and supported and safe, they are going to stay. And they're not just going to stay and plod on, they're going to stay and they're going to thrive. And that's good for everybody. Absolutely. So yeah, I think you're right. The other thing that you said that I don't want to miss is that you said policies are really important, but they're not everything. And you then went on to describe all of the other stuff. So I think there is that danger that people go, right, done the policies, tick, move on. And from what you're saying, it's so much more than that.
Absolutely.
Marsha, we're virtually out of time. I'm going to ask you to give the six again, the six kind of key areas again, and then I'm going to have to kind of wrap up. So what were those 6 areas again that we should be looking at?
Okay, safety for your clients, making sure that that they have a safe space, whether that's physically, emotionally, even the environment that they're in. Trustworthiness, doing what you say you're going to do, and when you're going to do it, not over promising either. Choice, involving your patient or your client with choice. Let them be part of that process in their own health and well-being. Empowerment, empowering patients or clients to help with their own health. Empower them to look at their, be involved in their own healing as well. It's not directive, it's a collaborative approach, which is the next one, which is being able to collaborate. So whether that's with your peers, helping them to connect with, like-minded other patients, but collaborate with their own health and well-being, with their own care. And also cultural considerations, checking that, what does that look like for you in your organization, so those are the kind of 6 in a
Thank you. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I know that this has been literally just skipping over the surface of the subject, and that you do much deeper work with individuals and organizations. So thank you so much. As I said, this will be available as a podcast and on YouTube. So if you are watching this on YouTube or listening to the podcast, please like and subscribe. We have got an event coming up in November, Monday, 27th of November, and it's all about internalized oppression. And I can tell you I had great fun when I was putting together the graphics for that. And I almost put a certain politician in there, but I decided that would just be going a little bit too far, but really looking forward to exploring internalized oppression in the context of Black All Year. So thank you again so much, Marsha. It's just really, really lovely speaking with you. And thank you, everybody. Take care.